PR4A is a registered society set up by a group of parents having kids with autism and related disorders, with the common objective of sourcing for the latest and most successful method for the treatment of autism to help achieve their best potential. To find out more, log on to www.pr4a.org.
Trax 101.
And in the studios with us this morning, we have Dr. Hasnah Toran, who is a senior lecturer at University Kebangsaan Malaysia, and she has a PhD in early intervention autism assessment, and Mr. Lim Kun Chuan, who is from the Persatuan Sumber Autisma Ibu Bapa Malaysia, or the Parents Resource for Autism Malaysia. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us here.
Yeah, well, before we get into the thick of things, talk more about autism, tell us a little bit more about yourself. What made you want to get into early intervention as such, Doctor?
Well, I was a high school teacher, and when my first son, at the age of 3, was diagnosed with autism, I was really frustrated because there's not many services for us. We were scrambling for information, we were scrambling for services, and I soon joined PR4A and got a lot of support, information, and soon after that, new parents who have just found their kids to be diagnosed would come to see me and just get information, and I was saying like, boy, we need to have an expert on autism in Malaysia. And also at that time, our group PR4A, we realized that there's no expert on autism in Malaysia. So what we did was we brought in, using our own money, brought in experts from the US, Australia and Japan. And I think we can't go on depending on outside experts for a long time. So that's one of the reasons why I quit my job and went to do my PhD in the US.
And did that open a new world to you?
Oh, definitely, yes. And witnessing how things are done differently over there, and how people are more compassionate toward others who are less abled, and just a totally different paradigm.
A totally different paradigm to you.
Yes.
And you have learned so much. That are you lecturing or teaching more about
Yes,
this?
I am lecturing students in the UKM who are going to be special ed teachers, and this might be controversial, but I suppose I'm supposed to be controversial here. The way teachers do their job in schools, we are way behind, and the way they are being trained in universities, we are behind. We need to catch up.
That's informative. Well, we're going to find out what PR4A is, and we're going to come back and find out more from Mr. Lim about how he got into PR4A.
PR4A is a registered society set up by a group of parents having kids with autism and related disorders, with the common objective of sourcing for the latest and most successful method for the treatment of autism to help achieve their best potential. To find out more, log on to www.pr4a.org.
And that was the sexy voice of Naji. Thank you very much for staying with us right here on Trax 101. Mr. Lim, how did you get involved with PR4A, or Parents Resource for Autism Malaysia?
Okay, PR4A is actually a parent support group. We basically help parents who have or are suspected of having autism, children with autism. Now, for my part, it started when my son was about 3 years old. We suspected, but we couldn't confirm. Over in Malaysia here, the thing is, nobody seems to know anything. So we go from one specialist to another specialist until we went to one particular doctor in UH. Now, what he did was, after half an hour, he looked at my kid. He says, I think he has autism. Right? He thinks only. And he says, why don't you go on the web, look up all the articles you can see, and educate yourself on it.
But I'm sure there are tests that they put together now to find out if a child's suffering from autism.
Not really.
Not really.
What they do is visually.
So it's trial by fire up until now.
Observation. As against to some parents that last year I've advised one parent to actually go over to Australia to have their child assessed. I've told them, not that I'm an expert, but looking at it, I said, your son has very strong inclination of having autism. So why don't you do it? So what she did was she went over to Australia. She actually gone through an assessment, and they were able to give her very detailed breakdown in terms of the social aspects,
abilities,
intellectual abilities, everything, where the kid is and where he should be. And what's more interesting is they can come up with a program for the parent to actually look into it to help bridge the gap. Now that is what we are looking at.
Bridging the gap, that's something interesting that we need to talk about. There is a gap to be bridged here. Do you agree with me?
They do have impairments. Impairments in communication, social skills, and sensory issues.
Right. But before we get into all that, if one comes up to you saying, if I come up to you, look at your child and say, Mr. Lim, is your son or daughter autistic? Is that the right way to term it?
Well, the politically correct term is, does your child have autism? Because our child is just like any other child, right? They have the autism features in it. So the politically correct term is, do your child have autism?
So is your child autistic is derogatory?
And it's not just a matter of what you call it. People like to say, oh, tomato is tomato, potato is potato, whatever. But the thing is, once you say autistic child, you don't see the child with their strength, their capabilities. It's all very negative. So now in the area of special education, we're moving to this perspective called the strength-based perspective. Anybody in the world have their strengths and weaknesses. But why do we highlight the weaknesses of children with disabilities? Because when we highlight their weaknesses so much, we fail to find time and energy to focus on developing their strength. That's the reason why, really. It's not matter a rose is still a rose and all that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Let's talk about the symptoms of autism. What are the symptoms of autism? If anyone could shed some light on this.
Well, I think it's really important to say that our children do not have any physical features or facial features that would differentiate them from other kids. But you can tell a child has autism from people like to say weird behaviors. Now, why is this? Now, because children with autism have impairments in 3 areas. Number 1 is their communication skills. Number 2, their social skills. And number 3, the sensory issues that they have. So, again, another thing that I would like to share here is the clinical term for autism is autism spectrum disorder.
Autism spectrum disorder,
spectrum disorder. That word spectrum is really important because children with autism can range from those who really have mild autism and they are high functioning, and those who are really have severe autism and low functioning. But they all have autism, and we cannot say that we have one curriculum and that curriculum is for children with autism.
So you have to tailor make.
Yeah.
That's right.
No one curriculum fit all. Yeah. So we need to talk about the spectrum, and sometimes people will come to me and say, wow, that boy has autism, but he can do this, he can do that. Yes, of course, because they are children. They have their own abilities. And with Malaysia, when we have a law that says, only children who are educable can be in public government schools, where do they go? They don't get education, they don't get early intervention, and therefore how can they develop? And when they do not develop, people say, oh, they don't develop because they have autism, and not because they have not been getting...
And that's a fallacy?
Yeah. And not because they are not getting early intervention, they're not getting education. Take people like to say kids are normal, but they are typically developing. Now, take a kid who is typically developing. Don't send them to kindergarten, don't send them to preschool, don't send them to schools. Lock the boy in the house from the age of 3 to the age of 13. I bet you the boy will develop some issues, right? So that's what's happening to our children, we have to beg, we have to search, we have to dig for centers that will take our kids. And when our kids don't get services, people say, oh, they are weird, they're hyperactive, they're so on and so forth.
But these kids can be as normal as any other